Welcome! You join me and Andy en route to the local Royal Enfield dealer to ride the latest iteration of the Himalayan 450, or Himalayan 450 if you like. But before you ride along with me on the Himalayan, you should know this is a very first impressions review of it. However, I am a very experienced on-road and off-road rider, as is Andy, who is riding the fruity Continental ahead of me. He also rode the bike. And I've also ridden the original air-cooled Himalayan 411, as I call it. More on that and how it compares to this latest model later. Full disclosure, the GoPro mic failed to record audio while I was riding the Himalayan. But that is okay, as the bike was a memorable ride for many reasons. Consequently, I've had time to digest the ride and hone my thoughts more precisely than I might have usually. While this vid is, as I said, a first impressions review, it is also a reflection of my thoughts on the Himalayan 450's strengths and its areas for improvement. And while I really like the bike, it does have some very definite oversights in my opinion, although some of them are easily rectified, while one or two may be harder. As for whether I would ever own one, why or why not, that of course would depend, and I suggest you listen right to the end of the video to sum that up. If you're planning on buying one of these for a long off-road ride, say on the Dempster to the Yukon, or using it predominantly off-road, then I would wait until you've watched to the end of this video for my opinions on that as well. As I said earlier, I've ridden the previous Himalayan, the 411 as I like to call it. I believe I labeled it as a sweet bike. Perhaps that was a bit condescending, as it is a very solid and robust motorcycle, if a little underpowered and lacking in a little refinement. But for the price, it offered a solid platform and I did enjoy riding it. I'm not one of those people who whines about small sports cars not having enough room for your golf clubs or a sheet of plywood. While I enjoyed my previous ride on the Himalayan 411, like most I expect, I bumped up against its limits very quickly. It is what it is, an entry-level 411cc rugged single with adequate power to putter and chug, but overtaking or highway riding would be a challenge. Weighing in at 429 pounds or 196 kilograms with only a 5-speed gearbox and 24 horsepower and an equal number of foot-pounds of torques on tap. One of the only two surprises you're ever going to get on this bike is when you pull out to pass another vehicle over 50 kilometers an hour. You may spend a lot of time studying the door handles on the car as you inch past it, perhaps noticing the driver's earrings, or, if you're lucky, admiring the hood ornament moments before you cut in rather too close to her grille in order to avoid the oncoming hood ornament. There was one other potential gusset-soiling feature with the Himalayan 411, because if my memory serves me correctly, the brakes were the worst I've ever experienced on any motorcycle, and I include the Harley-Davidson Street 750 in that list. Here I hold my hands up and say I've only ridden that one 411 on that one day, so it could have been an aberration, but on speaking with others, it appears not. The suspension was conventional and pretty well non-adjustable except for the preload on the rear. Having said that, I enjoyed the bike and felt it would be a good daily commuter on slower roads, tolerable on fire roads, and be fun to ride, within its limits of course. So, as you can imagine, my initial thoughts on being offered a ride on the newer Himalayan 450 were to politely decline and watch Andy give it a go. He came back and insisted I ride it. Now, before we go for the ride, you have to understand something. I hadn't done any homework on this bike. I didn't know or care about the specs or completely trust Andy. He didn't give the game away. I had no idea whether he was setting me up or genuinely thought the bike was worth my attention. We have that sort of friendship. Warped. You have to understand, this is the man who once photoshopped me with my arm around Osama bin Laden and passed it around work. Of course, that was revenge for me replacing his work mugshot with that of a chimp, but I digress. So, as you can imagine, I went into this first impressions ride without any preconceptions and completely unsure of what to expect except for my experiences that I had had with the 411. With that, I give you my impressions of the Himalayan 450. Let's ride. First though, I'm 6 foot. 195 pounds in my gear, and I ride a V-Strom 1000, a Kawasaki Z900RS, a Moto Guzzi 1200 Griso, and a 2011 Husaberg FE dirt bike. I've ridden lots of bikes. The Himalayan 450 itself is only a shade heavier than the previous one at a claimed 199 kilograms with all its fluids. A suspicious little number, but I don't have any evidence that Royal Enfield are fabricating this. Certainly the ride, both at low and high speed, make the bike feel lighter than the previous version. I hate stats because at best they only give you a rough impression of what or how the bike should perform. But for the sake of comparing it with the older version, here goes. Instantly, when you ride the Himalayan 450, it feels like a proper bike, not a toy. While the seat height is adjustable, the 825 height suited my 33-inch inseam perfectly with my legs at a comfortable 85-degree angle, and not too bent. My reach to the bars was easy and allowed for my arms to be slightly bent. The foot pegs are okay, although I would definitely enlarge them if riding off-road for long jaunts where you're standing. Stock, the seat is slightly higher than the 800mm seat height of the older bike, but is adjustable. The seat for my 25-minute jaunt was comfortable, but that's all I can say. I've never met a bike seat that was entirely comfortable for the duration of its fuel range, which in this case is epic with a tank capacity of 17 litres and a claimed mileage of 30 kilometers per litre, which offers a real-world range of approximately 400 to 520 kilometers on a full tank. I'd be surprised if your bum outlasted that range. Okay, on to the actual ride. Personally, I like the look of the 4-inch TFT dash, which on this day, which was a little overcast, had an easy-to-read display, which included a gear indicator, which was all controlled by a joystick on the left bar. But that said, I was wondering how well this would last on, say, the Dempster Highway after a few drops in the gravel, or dust blastings and washboarding sessions. Still, a speedo, tach, odometer, voltage and fuel range, and compass aren't strictly necessary, are they? Using the mode button on the right bar and switching between eco and performance mode is possible only when you're stopped. But a feature I really like is the ability to tune the ABS to off-road settings and to disable the rear ABS entirely. This is necessary on dirt, as locking the rear wheel will help you get the bike turned in more quickly when you need it. The switchgear is easy to use and I found the buttons intuitive. As I said, I didn't read anything before this ride. Despite this, I was able to navigate myself around the buttons and the display quickly. Are you listening, Honda Africa Twin? Immediately on riding, the suspension feels firmer, more businesslike, and the engine more capable than the previous version. The upside-down 43 Showa front forks are excellent on road, and given my experience with off-road, I think they would be adequate off-road if treated with respect. However, I couldn't see any adjusters top or bottom on the front. Again, the rear shock is only preload adjustable as far as I could see, so jumping is out. Riding trails and fire roads at moderate pace is entirely within the purview of this bike, but single track at pace would be out as well. Still, like I said, wishing you could get a sheet of plywood in your sports car is just daft. This isn't a true off-road bike. I don't expect it to be able to do jumps and fancy tricks. The bike feels planted on the road and the front end gives good feedback and is comfortable without being too wallowy or vague. Fork dive was negligible while braking, with both brakes in real-world applications. The bike is enjoyable to ride, and while it's not quite the razor-sharp Supermoto, it does encourage you to chuck it into corners despite that dirt-loving 21-inch front. I enjoyed this ride. With its long stroke, 40 horsepower and 30 pound-foot of torque, the engine is more than happy to chug low down like the last bike was, but it can build from the bottom in a way the older bike never could. I haven't looked at the torque curve, but it feels like it gets to 90% of its maximum well before the 5,500 RPM peak, which is great. This engine is happy to provide you with what you need wherever you are in the rev range. It's in a different class to the original, and I was impressed by its flexibility and willingness to get up and go. It may not be intoxicating, but it is everything you need for the road. You can pass anyone to most legal limits. The 6-speed box is precise and firm without being too notchy. There's no doubt you've changed gear when you do it. The old bike felt anemic from idle, but the fueling on this bike is perfect. I found no holes, flat spots, or racing at steady throttle settings. The engine is surprisingly smooth for a single, and you could be forgiven for thinking it was a twin. There are vibes, but nothing that interferes with the comfort or distracted me or blurred the mirrors. The engine is remarkably smooth for a single. Certainly my backside, hands, or feet never complained for the 20 or 25 minutes that I rode it. The overall paint quality and finish of the bike is remarkable given its price point. It feels much more premium than the older one, although I can't say how the various nuts, bolts and welds will hold up, which are common gripes with some Royal Enfield owners of other models. Speaking of gripes, for what it's worth, here are mine. The airflow on this bike's optional upgraded tall screen is not great. Yes, that's the tall screen. The stock bike comes with a much shorter one. For me, neither upgrade or tall are applicable to this screen, as it is neither. I was riding without a bill on my helmet, but at 6 feet I was getting a lot of windage off the tall screen right at my helmet. While it wasn't quite at full buffet levels, it was a constant distraction at speeds over 70 to 80 kilometers an hour. Personally, I would have opted for the stock low screen, as I feel that much of the windage from that would be at chest height and leave clear air around your helmet. So good news really, as this would be cheaper for you. Either that or go aftermarket with a twin shield option, if there is one, to sculpt the airflow. I also noticed a little interference with the airflow around the shield from the mirrors. Perhaps longer stalked mirrors would be better. The view in the mirrors, by the way, is great. All of my other negatives with the bike have to do with if you will be doing any off-road work with it. If you won't, then by all means skip on, although they may still apply if you're the sort of person who likes to do their own maintenance. The Himalayan 450 does not come with tubeless tires. For off-road work, it would be easier to patch tubeless tires than remove the wheel, the tire, and the inner tube, and then remount it all in the bush. Given this bike is marketed by Royal Enfield as built for all roads, built for no roads, not having a tubeless option is an oversight. Luckily though, Royal Enfield are in the process of rectifying that, so if I were to buy this bike and ride the Dempster or other long gravel road, I'd wait for this option. Going off-road is a great experience, but be warned, accepted practice by dirt riders is to clean your air filter at the end of every day, particularly if you're sharing the dusty trails with other riders. That's why serious off-road vehicles come with easily accessible air boxes so that you can clean the filter. Many ADV bikes often suffer with poorly designed access to their airbox, although for the Yamaha T7 it's as easy as lifting off the seat, unscrewing 4 screws on the airbox lid and lifting the filter out. Unfortunately, to access the air filter on the Royal Enfield Himalayan 450, you will need to remove the fuel tank by disconnecting 2 fuel lines and then 2 electrical connectors, then loosening a nut holding the tank in place, then lifting the tank and sliding it back. Once the tank is out of the way, you'll see the airbox, which you can access by unscrewing 3 screws and lifting the cover. On a dusty or muddy road, perhaps even with rain coming down, that would be a chore. The chances of contaminating fuel or losing critical screws is high at the end of a long, hard day on the dirt. For me, that just isn't good enough, particularly when you compare that to the Himalayan 450's chief competitor, the CF Moto 450 MT, which requires only the seat to be removed, revealing 2 screws in the snorkel airbox cover to undo in order to simply slide out the cassette-type air filter. No fuel hoses to grapple with under the tank, no electrical connectors which you have to remember which tab to push, pull or press, and no tank to lift. Perhaps the biggest knock for me is the curb weight of this bike. On road, this is not an issue, and it feels light and agile, really nice. However, weight is king off-road, and this bike is 200 kilograms before you add your luggage and your crash bars, etc. This is a lot of weight to lift. It's 25 kilograms, over 50 pounds, more than the CF Moto 450 MT, for instance, and it's more than a DR650. We haven't even mentioned the DR400s that are coming out from Suzuki. Finally, while the front tyre is a wonderful 21-inch tyre, the rear wheel is a 17-incher. While there are choices for tyres, an 18-inch rear, like on the CF Moto 450 MT, gives you far more choices for tyre. If I've ended on a slightly sour note, that is not the intention of this video. Yes, I've been hard on the Himalayan 450, but again, it's a wonderful bike, far better than the 411 in every way. I would certainly consider one if I were mostly going to use it on the road with only the odd off-road excursion. However, if I were looking for a 50-50 on-road, off-road bike, as indeed it is billed by Royal Enfield, then for me it would be the CF Moto 450 MT, with its slightly revier 270-degree parallel twin, also because of the current availability of tubeless tyres, the 18-inch rear, the easy access to the airbox, and the adjustable and front rear suspension, not to mention the lighter weight. That said, at $1,000 less, the Himalayan is a great deal. So, the ball is in your court. Please leave me a comment below telling me what you would choose and why you would do it. Perhaps you've actually chosen the Royal Enfield Himalayan 450 or one of its competitors. Let me know why. And don't forget to give this a thumbs up. Thanks very much for watching. This is the Blue Marble Rider, out.